Hey guys, lots to cover today. We actually had three sessions in the meantime. One of them was a kind of a two-on-one session with my characters who entered the painting, and the next two were pretty back-to-back, so I decided not to make a video for them. Also, time is a thing. So, our characters entered the painting and found themselves dropped into the water. The painting itself was of a few ships, these large fishing vessels, actually. So our characters have fallen in the water and they swim. One of them swims to shore and the other one swims to one of the ships. Harvey finds himself on shore, wandering about, and really tries to come to grips with this situation. He's the first one to arrive and he heads to the bar that's there first. Um, he walks in and it's a old fisher's bar. So there's no one there right now. It's kind of a weird kind of situation where there's like a pretty large bar and nobody in there, and he looks around, finally finds the barman, and starts having a conversation with him. Meanwhile, Nualin has been pulled up on deck of one of these large schooner vessels or fishing vessels. I'm not quite sure what type. So he gets pulled up on deck and starts talking to the crew, but the crew speaks a different language that he doesn't understand. So more or less with hand signals and a few good rolls, he's able to communicate like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And they realize he's not from there, and they're like, "Oh, we kind of know what to do here," and back they send him on shore to the bar. Apparently, that's like kind of a point for them. Also, he has a quick conversation with the captain and sees another painting similar to the one that they found behind the captain's desk. It's quite large. And they're like, that's a little strange. And so he goes on shore, and the guys that go with him all have a very somber kind of look to them. Everything that he's seen up to this point is very painted. All the characters are these images of sailors. They don't look like real sailors. They're not, rough and tumble dudes that have had, years of trouble. These look like Disney character sailors. So they're all in perfect outfits, white and blue. They all look like Shmee, but jacked. So very strange situation. Anyway, as he enters the bar, he walks in first, and the other guys, as they walk in, very quickly grow old, and the beards grow out, and they become hunched over, and they very quickly turn into like the old sailor archetype. They go find themselves a little place in the corner, and the barman comes over, and Harvey and Llewellyn sit together and have a conversation about what's going on here. The barman comes over and gives them some choices of drinks. Harvey has a drink of his alcohol, the one that he has bought previously from the crocodile, and the barman offers them his drink, and Llewellyn has some of that. Now, this is going to eventually bite Llewellyn in the butt, because what they're slowly figuring out is this painting is an unreality. It's an imaginary reality. So, Llewellyn has just become slightly more imaginary. And Harvey is drinking something from reality, so this is causing problems. Harvey offers his drink to the barman, who, when he drinks it, ages extremely quickly. So Harvey's like, "Oh, that's very strange. What if I gave him more?" And more or less, the barman asks, "Hey, can I go out on my own terms? I'd really prefer not to be here forever." Explains that this whole situation is like a time loop, and they just keep going over and over and over again. And every once in a while, he can remember that he woke up the day before, but most of the time he can't. So Harvey gives him the rest of the drink and actually puts his decanter down in the middle of the room and puts his real alcohol in, and this causes the whole place to go to heck. You get a spray of this reality into a non-reality, which slowly starts tearing the non-reality apart. It starts folding in on itself, and it slowly becomes two-dimensional. As it's becoming two-dimensional, Llewellyn is having trouble, and he realizes there's a painting behind the bar, and he quickly goes to try to touch it, try to get out of there quickly. Harvey spends a little bit more time there, having drunk in his reality, so he's a little bit stronger in the situation. And because the painting's slowly becoming two-dimensional, it's also shrinking, and he inside there is getting slowly crushed by what feels like two walls. Being a three-dimensional being in a two-dimensional world, not exactly good. So he reaches out and grabs the painting out of the back of the pirate ship, or the fishing ship. He grabs it and pulls it towards him, and then he touches the painting, because the painting, the reality is shrinking, right? So that's why he's able to reach so far. He gets out of there, and as Harvey does, he looks around and realizes things have changed. So we'll go to Newallen quick. Newallen appears roughly 3 hours before everything happens. And he's like, okay, cool. And as he moves into reality, he realizes that things aren't really working properly. So he moves into the water and he's trying to get back to the boat. But as he's doing that, he fails a few saves because when you're close to another time, my world, I don't really like time travel a lot. I think time travel is really fascinating, but it causes a lot of problems. So more or less, I kind of have the real timeline snaps back into reality, or people like auditors more or less snap it back to reality, kind of Terry Pratchett-y there. So he goes in, he's very close, and then as he gets close to his own body, he just disappears. Like he goes out and reaches, and then he touches, and then he disappears. And then Newallen, the one in the boat from the past, is still alive, which is really interesting because it leaves like the player knows what's happened in that unreality, but the character doesn't, which is kind of fun, and he's actually done a really good job of playing that. So Newallen is dead and alive and kind of in between. It's kind of fun. Harvey arrives 3 hours late and realizes that, oh crap, this is going to be a bit of a problem. And he is greeted by, hello, I am more or less Death. It's my variation of it, but Terry Pratchett's fantastic, and I figured that Death is a wonderful character, so I'm going to use kind of my play on it. So, Death explains that you must go and find your partners in the position they're in, and more or less, not to put too fine a point on it, he has to put the timeline right by coming out of the water with the painting that he now holds and not touching and now that, so he more or less is replacing the painting that they went into with the painting that he now holds from the other pirate ship. So he does, and that's the end of that session. More or less, he fixes that timeline, gets pulled out of the water, and they are all together. There, that's that session completed. So I'm going to hop right into the next session. This, as I said before, is going to be a long video. So this is, sorry, it's a bit of a long video, but this is what you're going to get. So, the next session I thought was flippin' hilarious. So, they pull Harvey out of the water. They rescue him, even though he was totally okay. So, they all kind of are asking, hey, so what's the plan? Harvey is trying to be like, hey, like, what's going on with, like, why don't we should probably like move on and get back to base and take a rest. Newallen just keeps fishing, and Yama is more or less their rogue. Yama is like, look guys, we should weigh our options first. Like that's the really important thing. We have to come up with a proper plan. As the sergeant more or less looks at them, just kind of shaking his head, like who cares what you guys do? At the end of the day, like this is a scout mission. So. They decide as a team to go out and at least investigate a little bit this shipwreck that they had seen previously. Unfortunately, on the way out, Yama gets fancy with their driving and deja vus into a bunch of rocks, which sinks their ship. They're able to get off the boat, and their sergeant is just pissed. They're just terribly angry with them. They're like, okay, it's enough. This is enough. We're going back. The sergeant more or less says twice in one day. Really, like this kind of bad stuff's happening like this often. Like, yeah, and it's getting bad. So Harvey has to get pulled back to shore, which is another twice in one day. And Harvey comments as they get back on shore. He says, "Well, I found your sunken ship," and that was a little mean, but I thought really, really funny. So I put on the song from Titanic, played on a pan or like the slide whistle. It's just hilarious as their boat kind of sinks in the background. Everyone nearly drowns. Everyone gets back to shore. Fortunately, Harvey pops into his bottle to make it easier for them to pull him to shore, and they have to walk back to town. This is kind of a walk of shame, which I thought was really funny. As they arrive, they see a gentleman in red pants, a big, monstery dude with red striped pants, and they're like, "Oh," and he's talking kind of to the mayor, and he's kind of they see it's kind of an intimidation thing. They see two big other guys with him, and they're like, "Oh crap, what are we gonna do about this?" Right? And uh, turns out that they are going to try to trade the sinking of their ship for services rendered. So, um, sorry guys. So they go over to the mayor, and they're like, "Hey, what about like what's going on here?" And he's like, "Well, turns out I'm being more or less bullied by these guys. They've been here for a while, and I need I need them taken care of eventually." And they're like, "Well, we sunk one of your ships." And he's like, "Well, that's 1,000 gold pieces." And they're like, "We don't have that much. Can we do something?" And he's like, "Well, if you deal with these guys, you can take whatever they have there, but that'll be worth 1,000 gold pieces to us because these guys are charging us consistently." Um, so they're going to go out and deal with the smugglers. They start heading out. Let's see. Oh yeah, they visit the sawbones of the town just to get some more stuff. Um, they buy a few little like knickknacks, like a bit of like a healing potion and stuff like that, just to kind of keep them upright. They buy another med kit so that they can stabilize people. And Yama says hilariously, like, I don't fight my enemies. I deal with them on the court," which is pretty funny. Everybody kind of just gave the longest eye roll to that. They are halfway down the beach, heading towards where the smugglers are. They don't actually know exactly where they are because the people don't really head that way for obvious reasons. There's a bunch of smugglers there. And they find a strange shell, which is like a brass shell on the ground, and they open it up. It turns out to be some kind of bunker. They don't really spend a lot of time on that, but they do. They found it, and they found that it was interesting. So they keep moving forward. They make a plan, and as they're near the excuse me, as they're nearing the smuggler's base, they come across three smugglers. They have a quick battle with these guys. Fortunately, they're able to take them out before one of them tries to run back to base. And just after they kill these guys, one guy tries to pull out a flare and light it. Now, this is an important fact. The fact of the matter is, these guys didn't launch the flare right away. Something that my party didn't really pick up on. They launched it. They would try to launch it right when things got to their worst. So the party didn't really pick up on what that meant. It's kind of a secret there. So the guy tried to pull the flare out and couldn't. They stopped and killed him beforehand. Also, I gave all these guys sneak attack damage. I figured, they're like roguey, and I also gave them death saves because they're kind of their own little hero party. Because I think that's hilarious, and watching your parties just have to put people down, just like the enemies would have to put them down, is really funny. So that's that whole session. That session was really, really fun. Unfortunately, the player who plays Newallen wasn't there, so he didn't get to do as much. It was really just Harvey and Yama making hilarious comments while the sergeant or Ritsu just laughed at the stupidity of it all. So, next session. they start planning. They're like, okay, we got to draw these guys out of the smuggler's pit. We don't really know how to do that, but we'll figure it out. So they start spitballing plans. They come up with like a few pretty good ones, but at the end of the day, I don't really get involved in the planning process. I more or less just try to be like, come on, guys, like, I want to play. That's the only thing I ever really do with planning processes is like, you guys realize that this stuff does take time and there are other people around. That's more or less where I leave it. So they're like, okay, well, set some traps. They sent two of them out scouting. And my whole thing with scouting is I like making it a skill challenge because skill challenges are fun and scouting is boring. If you send two players away, the two people at home are just waiting for those scouts. They're not doing anything other than having a quick conversation. And that's not fun. So I more or less made it so 3 failures and you guys are discovered. You guys can succeed as many times as you want, and the more successes you get, the more information you get. So they got a few successes, but then the failures start ramping up, and they're like, oh, you can't stay here forever. So they gain a lot of information. They find out that the little base is in a cove, and the only entrance to the cove from the land is over like a rope over the back of this large cliffed area, which has no cover, so you couldn't really sneak up there. It looks like it's pretty intentional. And then you have to rope down into the cove. And the other way is through the sea. So they're like, we're not really going to be able to do that. How about we launch a flare and draw them to us? They set a bunch of traps on the path. As quick as they can. There's a deadfall trap and a bunch of just like pungy spikes out of the ground. They didn't dig pits because it take too long, but they're just like, well, we'll just shove these like bamboo more or less straight into the earth, and people step on that, it's going to hurt. And I thought, yeah, why not, right? So they did that in a bunch of different places to make it like more dangerous for people to walk. So they made it. They do their best, more or less. Yama does a perception check at the beginning. This is just kind of the scout challenge. Perception, pass, found the boulder cluster that they're hidden the cove, I guess. New Orleans fails his investigation. Yama does a stealth and finds the repelling point, like more or less gets close enough that they can see where the baddies are repelling up and down. New makes a survival check, finds out it's actually a cave, kind of figures out how it's all done there, and then they all sneak back. And a few shrubs arrive. This area is just crawling with awakened shrubs, which I think is hilarious because it's not something that's going to bug you that much, but it's really funny to just kind of get rid of them. So the sergeant picks up a rock and just chucks it at one of these awakened shrubs and rolls high on damage and just vaporizes it. And then an Eldritch Blast from Harvey just vaporizes the other one, right? And I more or less rolled D12 of these stupid things, and they just keep popping up, and they're hilarious. They finish planning, they finish trapping, and then it's battle time. They pull their flare, and they wait. And this is kind of where things go a little awry. One of them hides in a tree. New Orleans hides in a tree, but he only has 2 arrows. So that's a bit of a problem. And Harvey hides right near the shoreline behind a shield, which works pretty good, but that means their whole crew is pretty much split up. One of them's in the forest on the left side, I guess for you guys, well, whatever. One's on the left side, one's on the right side, up in a tree. One of them's straight down the middle. That's the sergeant who's trying to draw them towards them so they run into traps. And then Harvey's way behind. So they're really split up. And this goes a little bit awry for them as the first 3 baddies arrive. Now, these 3 baddies are a rogue type enemy and 2 monk type enemies. I more or less give them like the very first ability of a class. Just, like the monks had the ability to do flurry of blows and pay a key point to do very simple things. But they only have 1, right? So make it a little more balanced. As I said before, this is a long video. Sorry, we're up to about 20 minutes now. To be exact, 1938. So they start the battle, and the first thing that happens is these bad guys kind of charge, looking around, and everybody more or less misses. They The monk now has this wrist crossbow that they found from the previous group of our monk Ritsu has a wrist crossbow that they found from the previous group of baddies that they encountered, the three rogues, and goes to shoot it, misses. And they're like, crap, this is not a good start. And then Newallen misses, and then Harvey can't shoot them because they're out of range, and then Yama is kind of hiding with a sword, holding their action for when somebody gets close. Things get pretty hairy pretty quick. The enemies charge in. Some of them hit some traps. They take some reasonable damage, and they're kind of clustered in. And they do a pretty good job. Our heroes do a pretty good job of like really piling in. Yama gets in there with their stabbing, kind of fading and coming back in, and fading, coming back in. Our Ritsu, the sergeant, just beats on guys and is really kind of holding their own. And they're doing pretty well. These three baddies are not really posing much of a threat. And then one of them shoots a flare. And that took their whole action. I made it an action to do it, and more or less had a counter, a countdown timer for when the rest of the reinforcements arrived, and this counted as taking off one of those counters. And I only had it be like 4 turns, because more or less what happened was when they shot the flare, the baddies assumed things have gone really, really bad for our scout party. Let's see how bad it is. So they send a small group of 3 out one way, and then they send the barge with the rest of their crew out the other way. This barge has their commander on it, and he's a big baddie. And it also allows them, if they see that the situation is hopeless, that the barge can get away with, the commander, and they can kind of skip town kind of thing before things get really bad. But the barge arrives, and there's not really all that many baddies. There's there's only 4 guys. We'll be fine, right? The barge has a mage of some kind who immediately steps off the barge and healing words one of the characters and brings them back up from they were on the healing words one of their guys who was on death saves, which really frustrated my crew. They just immediately looked at that mage and like, that guy dies next. And then they had 2 barbars who more or less had rage. That's the only thing that they got, which again is pretty powerful. These guys all have like kind of a drow stat line, but you give them one little bonus like rage, and it just makes it really hard to kill them. And then the last one I gave the zombie ogre stat line. This is the commander. Here he is right here. There he is. He's the pirate miniature. I really like this miniature. Painted brown because of like bark skin, but also he just looks super cool. Let's see if I can get him actually into a frame here. I don't think I'm going to be able to. Sorry, guys. Anyway, he's pretty flippin' cool. Love his stripy pants. Love his big old sword. So, this is going bad now. There's a lot of enemies, and our heroes are having a lot of trouble taking them out. So, very quickly, Yama takes that magnet orb that they found earlier and throws it on the ground, activates it, and it sucks all the weapons of everybody within a 15-foot radius towards it and makes them prone. This is the save of the game. This is the play of the game. No other character, like every other character, was kind of screwed. If these characters kept their weapons, this battle probably would have gone really bad. But it takes away all the barbarian swords and twists them to the point where they can't be used. It takes away the commander's sword, the big bad guy I just showed you. He has a sword. It's kind of taken like from Fire Emblem. It's like a killer edge, so more or less it crits a lot easier and it does more damage on crit. And this one's got some weird stuff going on with it, so you can hurt yourself to crit with it, and so it's like really powerful. But it steals that away from him, and all of them fall prone. Now this was not a very high DC save. And most of them had, 3 of them had advantage because they're barbarians on it. And all of them failed. I rolled 2 and a 4 for all of them. The rules were very specifically, you get, it's a 10 DC, but it's +2 for each metal item that you're carrying. So, the more metal you're wearing, the more it drops you to the ground. So, the battle continues on, and it's chaos. Harvey's now sprinting away from the shore because there's a big group, 4 enemies coming on the shoreline. He's like, nope, I'm out. He just runs away from the shore and starts shooting Eldritch Blasts back at them, trying to keep them away from him. And then you have our rogue is just fading in and out of combats and stabbing people. Now, each of these baddies also have a healing potion on them. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool thing because our characters actually, they killed a few of them like right off the bat, and what they're doing is they're using their healing potions, like the baddies' healing potions, against them. So like before the baddie has a turn, they'll all gang up on one guy, drop them, pull their healing potion, and give it to one of the characters that need it. At the end of the battle, nobody had a healing potion, but they got one healing potion from this battle. There were 7 at the beginning, and they got 1. That's how many like were either drunk by the enemies or drunk by our heroes. So it's complete chaos. Harvey's just running around like a maniac trying to get away from the big baddie, who's kind of focused on him because he's the only one who can really do real damage. And the big baddie has 126 HP, so it takes a while. And Harvey's the only one who can do true damage because he's the only one who's got magic attacks. So, at one point actually, just because it's awesome, Ritsu steals a flare off of one of the baddies, puts it into the baddie or into the big guy's mouth, and pulls the flare, which does fire damage, which is true damage to him, which I thought was really funny and pretty awesome. Harvey, keeps running away. Our rogue fades and keeps moving in and out. And at one point, Harvey drops. The big guy, now he doesn't have his weapon. He's punching. And he can still do 8 damage a turn punching because roll D2, right, 1 or 2 damage, plus 4, plus 2, right, because of his rage and 4 strength. So he's just pounding these guys and just doing a lot of damage. So he finally drops Harvey, and Harvey's already got like 1 death save, 2 death save. He's already almost dead, and everybody's like freaking out, like, what are we gonna do? And they realize that one of the characters that has dropped hasn't had their or one of the baddies that has dropped hasn't used their health potion. So they run a relay of the sergeant Ritsu runs back. The rogue runs back, finds the potion, pulls it out, gives it to Ritsu, who grabs it, runs it all the way back to Harvey, and puts it in his mouth to keep him alive. And yeah, it's pretty chaotic. As far as kills are concerned, Harvey got a lot of kills. He took out the mage. He took out, which was pretty cool. He took out one of the barbars. So this whole time, Nuwalin, more or less after the first initial melee, Nuwalin goes out and starts fighting against the mage and the 2 barbars because this video is now very long. Being a ranger, he's got a pretty good health pool, so he can fight these guys. And now that none of them really have weapons, he's doing pretty good. Harvey drops the mage, so it really becomes a 2-on-1 with the 2 flanking Nuwalin, and Nuwalin doing his very darndest to try to take these guys out. Nuwalin takes the big guy, the big baddie's sword. He's got that killer edge now, and he's just cutting into these guys back and forth. Now, again, they're barbars, so they don't take a lot of damage from him, and he finally drops one, moves his hunter's mark to the other one, and the second he does that, it's Harvey shoots his beam, spirals by, and Nuwalin just ducks out of the way and takes out that barbar. So really, I'd say the character who played best tank would be Ritsu, because Ritsu actually was in the battle the whole time. Character who played kind of backup best, the character who sat and really distracted the most, was Nuwalin. Character who did probably the most utility stuff and play of the game also is our rogue Yama, and the player who just flat damage was Harvey. So everybody did something pretty unique, and really, yeah, that's where we ended. It was, sorry this is a long video, but our characters did really, really well, and really we're starting to get into they're finally going to get their first big payday, obviously, now that they've got to go into the smuggler's hideout. Is there more enemies in there? Who knows? I do. They don't. But yeah, so long story short, really good sessions in the last little bit, and we're hoping that things continue on and stay good. Sorry that this video is a little rambly and long. That's how these videos are. I like making them this way, and if you like watching them, that's great. Things that I learned from these sessions. Number one, I have to really start talking more about these characters. Harvey is a hilarious character who's constantly trying to make a quick buck, which is awesome. Newallen is insecure and is trying to figure his stuff out, but is also has a really big issue with authority. Ritsu is done with this stuff and just wants to go home and has had enough of the military. And Yama is excited, but never has been in a situation where death is this prevalent. Like they play sports. So all these characters are really starting to come into their own, and I've really been enjoying just the dynamics between these different characters. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you got all the way to the end, cool. Don't like or subscribe. That's totally up to you. Yeah. Bye. Boop.